As you will see from the holding slide that Michelle has just put up, we have 3 speakers with the overall title, From the Ground Up, Soil Management in a Changing Climate. We had actually 3, I think, quite interesting talks, about 20 minutes each. We have David Dent on an investable proposal for regenerative agriculture and carbon capture in the Eurasian steppes. Ed Turner is going to talk about good crop, bad crop, options for a more sustainable oil palm. And then Mariska Bartlett on livestock and regenerative agriculture, a holistic approach. After the 3 speakers, there will be a chance to have a panel discussion, and we'd ask you, each of the participants, to submit your questions online via the in-chat button. And Michelle will be explaining how to do this a bit later. The proceedings will be recorded and be uploaded to the TAA website for viewing later. We will now provide a brief description of each of the organisations involved in the webinar. I will first introduce the TAA, and then Michelle will cover FFI, Professor Howard Griffiths, a description of GFS, and Mariana on CanPlant's Hub. Right, so I'll start off with the description of the Tropical Agriculture Association. This is an international association of individuals, institutional bodies, and civil society, generally concerned with the role of agriculture for sustainable development throughout the world, not specifically tropical, although that's the way we started. And the next slide shows the services we offer. Basically, we're looking at networking and sharing of ideas amongst members, which probably amount to about 700, mostly as subscribing individual and institutional members. We publish a 4-monthly journal, Agriculture for Development, some themed and some open issues. And we have a system of supporting young professionals who wish to do studies in international development overseas, and we provide some support, funding and mentoring. We've, I think, catered for about 250 over the last 15 years. And we have, we arrange meetings, seminars, webinars, as like this one, and we have 2 sort of formal lecture at events during the year. We also circulate topical news and job vacancies to members. We're involved in policy advice, and we're members of collaborative support, is probably the better expression, with the all-party parliamentary group on agriculture and food for development, and for organisations like the Royal Society of Biology, IFAR, IPS News. And then we have a system of honouring people who've made contributions to agriculture for development, and we support the early career members to gain experience in the agriculture field. So we would ask you finally, if you're interested in TAA, please do sign up. You will see the website address at the bottom of this page. Just log on there. We'd be delighted to have you on board. Right now, I'll hand over to Michelle at FFI, who will talk about their organisation and how to ask questions.
Thank you, Keith. Yeah, before I get started telling you guys about Fauna and Flora International, I'll just point out that there are 2 options at the bottom of your screen. One says Q&A and one says chat. You'll have the option during the presentations to put questions that you want to potentially have addressed by the panel in the Q&A section. You'll be able to comment on questions that other people have submitted and vote them up if you agree with them or like them. And the ones that have sort of the most activity around them will be the ones that we'll address at the end with the panel discussion. So, my name is Michelle Villeneuve. I am the Acting Senior Program Manager of the Agricultural Landscapes team at Fauna and Flora International. And with me here today from FFI is also Emma Scott, who is the Program Officer in our team. Emma is going to be monitoring the chat and engaging with you guys if you have any questions or concerns, mostly housekeeping things. So Fauna and Flora International, also known as FFI, is an international conservation charity established in 1903. We currently work in about 45 countries worldwide. Our vision is a sustainable future for the planet, where biodiversity is effectively conserved by the people who live closest to it, supported by the global community. And our mission is to conserve threatened species and ecosystems worldwide. The Agricultural Landscapes team at FFI works with industrial actors to improve the sustainability of production, including holding them accountable for biodiversity and traceability claims that they make. We also work with smallholders to reduce land conversion and the use of unsustainable practices while keeping food security needs and smallholder access limitations in mind. And in general, we look for improvements that are made via improved access to knowledge, to innovations, to inputs, to markets and opportunities. It really depends on the situation. So that is it for FFI. I'm now going to pass over to Professor Howard Griffiths of Cambridge Global Food Security.
Thanks very much, Michelle. Welcome and thank you very much for inviting us to participate here. I'm Howard Griffiths, and as you can see, I co-chair the Food Security Interdisciplinary Research Centre with Jag Shrai, who's based in IFM, and our coordinator is Francesca Manning. And we have some sort of seed corn funding from the university, which allows us to put together this IRC, which draws together those with a collective interest in food security. We represent a range of departments and schools across the university with the overall goal of trying to improve and draw on those collective expertise that don't normally have the chance to talk when we're stuck within each other's department or school. And so we're here to promote interdisciplinary research and explore additional opportunities. And if you see from the next slide, as part of that, we are active in delivering a number of large international research programs. Two I co-chair, the Tigris program, which is based primarily funded through GCRF and based in India, where we have over 30 postdoctoral researchers based, some in the UK and about a third in the UK and 2/3 in India. And we're working right across the piece in terms of developing policy for improved agricultural production, right through to crop science, through to hydrology, managing water sources, using archaeology, and then through to the social side of delivering into rural communities improved education and nutritional benefits. And the similar program operates through the Milneti program. And we also are affiliated with the large EIT Food. Finally, if you have the next slide, Michelle, thank you. We represent a coalition of the willing. As you can see here are some loose themes that we've sort of affiliated ourselves underneath, and we are looking for any of those across the university and beyond who are willing to be to see within these themes an opportunity to develop collaborative opportunities to actually tackle this major issue of global food security. Thank you very much, Michelle. And I'm going to hand on to Mariana now, who will tell us a little bit about camp plants.
Hello, everyone. So yes, my name is Mariana, and I'm the coordinator for Camp Plants Hub, which is a network in the University of Cambridge that connects all those involved in plants for food, sustainable energy and materials, health and ecosystems. Our vision is to generate impact with those doing plant science research in Cambridge and beyond. We do that by increasing connectivity between researchers, businesses, entrepreneurs, policymakers, and the public on how plant research can tackle global challenges. We are very lucky because in Cambridge there is a unique concentration of plant science collections and institutions that makes it a really exciting place to work and study. We benefit from having the presence of two big exceptional collections, the Cambridge University Botanic Garden and the Cambridge Herbarium, which has more than 1 million specimens, including those from Darwin. In addition, we have the Department of Plant Sciences that focuses on fundamental plant research and teaching, the Sainsbury Lab that looks at development biology, the Algal Innovation Center, which is a pilot scale lab that enables industry to come and collaborate with those looking at algae research. And most recently, and quite exciting, we have the new Crop Science Center, which is an alliance between the university and the National Institute for Botany and Agriculture, is due to open later this year, and it looks at taking fundamental research into the field, and the main aim is really to transform agricultural practices. We at Camplants, we can help researchers and external stakeholders in many different ways. We can help, Michelle, can we go to the next slide, please? We can help you with impact. We can help researchers design their pathways to impact, looking at different opportunities of public engagement and exploring more interdisciplinarity. We can also look at commercialization of research findings. We can also help disseminating research findings and looking at press releases and building links between departments. And we also enable and facilitate collaborations with the external industry. We can help finding funding and writing funding applications to increase and promote translational research. So get in touch, we always happy to help. And now I'll give the word to Keith. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody there. It does illustrate, I think, the fact that this is our 7th collaborative seminar, annual seminar, and that FFI, GFS are both members of the TAA, and Camplants is very much associated with GFS. So it is a very interesting little group of organisations within Cambridge, and we hope to be in touch more with the new crop centre when that opens. Right, thank you for the introductions. Now I shall commence with the speakers. The first one is David Dent. He is a TAA member and independent consultant. He was formerly director of ISRIC World Soil Information, based in the Netherlands. He now specialises in soil management in the Eurasian steppes, and he will give what we hope is a provocative talk about soil carbon loss and capture, an investable proposal, a plan for regenerative agriculture and carbon capture across the Eurasian steppes. David, over to you.
Thank you, Keith. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to introduce you to the best soil in the world. Can I have the first slide, please? Here it is. The black earth of the steppes. Well, the pit is 2 meters deep. Therefore, you see that the topsoil, the black topsoil, is 1 meter thick. And when I took this photo 50 years ago, it held 340 tons of organic carbon per hectare. It was made by grassroots. Those roots are responsible for something that you can't see in the picture. It has a unique granular structure, the size of garden peas, that can absorb all the rainfall and snowmelt that comes its way and supply crops with water through the long, dry steppe summer. And the organic matter is an inexhaustible store of plant nutrients. At least we used to think it was inexhaustible, but I'll come back to that. This soil is the world's breadbasket. It grows more than half of all the grain that is traded internationally. Next slide, please. This is where you'll see it. You'll find it across the steppes from Eastern Europe to China, across the prairies in North America, and the pampas in South America. I use the black earth as a special case of a wider issue, which is this. Soil is the biggest brake on global heating. It holds more carbon than the atmosphere and all standing vegetation put together. But for 12,000 years, farmers have been burning off soil organic matter. Farmers are responsible for 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. They have run up a carbon debt of 133 billion tons. The better the soil, the bigger the debt. The best thing they could do for the planet is to put it back again. And the best place to start is the best soil in the world. Next slide, please. 35 years of satellite measurements of what I'm going to call carbon capture capacity have revealed a dramatic decline across the steppes. Half of the organic matter that makes the black earth what it is has been pumped into the air. Best soil in the world is the worst example of land degradation, and not for the first time. In the 1930s, 3/4 of the topsoil and 3.5 million Americans left the Dust Bowl of the Great Plains. After that, soil conservation measures were developed, contour bunds, grassed waterways and the like. But they've never been popular because of their cost and continual upkeep. And they don't deal with the root cause of soil erosion, which is bare soil. Annual crops give scant protection against the elements. Ploughing trashes soil structure and accelerates the loss of humus, erosive runoff, and the loss of topsoil in dust clouds. We now have an alternative, which goes by the name of conservation agriculture. CA does different. It embraces zero tillage, continuous ground cover by crops and crop residues, and diverse crop rotations that control weeds, pests, and diseases. It works everywhere. It works everywhere for the simple reason that it eliminates destructive tillage and the daily attacks of sun, wind, and rain. Now, the purpose of ploughing is to kill weeds. Desiccant herbicides, in particular glyphosate, made zero tillage a viable proposition from the 1960s and 1970s onwards. What they offer is arrest of soil erosion. It requires only 70% ground cover to stop soil erosion. More reliable yields, more planting days, less outlay on farm machinery, and wait for it, 70% less fuel consumption and man hours. Let's go back to greenhouse gas emissions. The pre-industrial concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere was 280 parts per million. 280 parts per million. Burning fossil fuels and farming have boosted beyond 400 parts per million. And this is forcing global heating. If we are to hold back global heating to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, emissions must be halved by 2030. That's nearly on us. They need to be eliminated by 2050. And then the excess greenhouse gases have got to be hauled back. The only way we know how to haul them back is by growing things. But instead of absorbing carbon dioxide, agriculture is pumping it out. More soil organic carbon is being lost by mineralization, that is turning it into CO2, than is being put back again every day. The best figures I have are from 1963, reliable figures, long-term experiments. And across the steppes since 1963, soil carbon has been run down by between 2.4 and 3.8 tons of carbon per hectare per year. If we take the least of these figures, then mineralization of soil carbon has emitted 94 gigatons, or 12 parts per million of atmospheric carbon since 1963. That's 1.7 gigatons a year. That's 5 times the total UK annual emissions of all your Jaguars, Range Rovers, and central heatings. The slide up there shows my working, taking the area of black earth, the amount of arable black earth, or chestnut earth, which is the dry country cousin of the black earth, was on the map, and then allocating the minimum emissions. And you can see that Russia, with the greatest amount of black earth, obviously produces the greatest amount of emissions, and so on. Maybe I should just mention a gigaton is 1,000 million tons. These emissions can be halved simply by eliminating fallow, which is commonly done across the steppes and indeed in all dry countries, supposedly to save water, but it doesn't. It's still done. You can halve emissions simply by not fallowing and growing something instead. The whole conservation agriculture package, which I mentioned before, offers carbon capture of between 0.5 and 1.5 gigatons a hectare per year, complete arrest of soil erosion, and bigger crops. Far right of the table there, wheat that is grown in rotation rather than as monoculture gives you an extra ton a hectare, even if you don't put any fertilizer or anything on. That means that with the kinds of crop rotations that we advocate, present production can be achieved from a lesser area, which will make room for perennial grasses and legumes that we need in the rotation to put the organic matter back into the soil. The problem is that at the moment, there's no market for all this green biomass. Those of us brought up in East Anglia will know about Coke of Norfolk in the 18th century. Coke of Norfolk's answer was to feed the green biomass to livestock that turned it into meat, milk, wool, and manure. And manure doubles the benefit of crop rotation, hence the extra 2 tons of yield per hectare on the far right of the table. Integrating, or should I say reintegrating, crops and livestock, like they were integrated when I was a boy, would regenerate rural communities. So many more jobs on the go, so many more things to do. The extra production would make space to restore degraded land for wildlife, water resources, and amenity. but the people and skills needed to run livestock are now hard to come by. The alternative is to turn the green biomass into biogas. If we take Moldova, our smallest country, as an example, a farming system with 1 year in 3 under perennial legumes and grasses would transform its annual emissions into annual carbon capture. At the same time, the legumes would produce all the nitrogen that all the crops can use, with enormous savings in the energy presently used to manufacture nitrogen fertilizer, which is a vast cost. And the green biomass, converted to biogas, could easily meet the country's power requirements. And finally, the digestate from biogas production is first-class organic fertilizer, which would recycle all the plant nutrients and most of the organic matter. That's the opportunity. The critical need is for investment. Conservation agriculture has now been adopted by over about 14% of global cropland. But it's 60% in Brazil, 75% in Australia, but only 10 million hectares across the steppes. Investment in know-how and infrastructure would speed things up, but we need a new means of finance. I didn't know at the time, but the Paris Accord in 2015, that we all think is such a good thing, was forced on governments by the world's bankers and insurers. The alternative being global bankruptcy. Corporate reporting on how companies are accounting for climate change reveals risks assessed in trillions of dollars. In response, and led by Mark Carney, capital investment of 120 trillions has been lined up to counter these risks. That puts the COVID costs into perspective. And the cheapest finance available is through something called green bonds, which are issued by governments or municipalities that have the capacity to accomplish the work. By law, insurance companies, for example, are not allowed to invest in flood defenses. And why should they? Because other insurers would benefit. But they all can invest in green bonds. And every green bond that has been offered has been oversubscribed. The shortfall is of credible action plans. So here is a credible 5-year plan for the steps. Next slide, please. A credible action plan which will save 1.3 to 3 gigatons of emissions every year, draw down a further 0.5 to 1.5 gigatons every year. The actual plans are longer than this, but here are the essentials. First of all, don't plow. Don't do it. 2, don't fallow. Don't do it. It's a no-brainer. Instead of following, plant a cover crop like annual medic, or a mixture of perennial legumes and grasses that can be undersown with the summer crop to come through. Keep the ground covered with productive vegetation, because it's then capturing carbon and putting it back in the soil. Third, adopt a diverse cropping system. The more diverse, the better. This is crucial. Crop rotations that include cover crops, perennial legumes and grasses, first of all, generate enough roots to replace the humus lost by mineralization. Nearly all the soil organic matter comes from plant roots. The above ground parts of plants disappear within months, even if you leave them on the surface. They just, they mineralize. Roots are more recalcitrant. And down in the soil, there's not as much oxygen, and therefore the organic matter can convert into humus. Secondly, the more diverse the cropping system, the more effective it is at controlling weeds, pests, and diseases without resort to toxic chemicals. I earlier mentioned glyphosate, which may be a great big hate for some people. Not me, but it's a great big hate for a lot of people. You don't even need to use it if you've got a good enough system of biological control of weeds, pests, and diseases. The biology will do it for you, free. Finally, integrate crops and livestock, or alternatively, invest in biogas. Oh, and not, and absolutely finally, in the steppes, plant windbreaks. You could put in wind farms instead, actually. It's a windy place, and anything you can do to break that wind is a great thing. It holds the soil in place, makes it more humid. So that's what you need to do. Do that, and you start fixing carbon instead of burning it off. How much will it cost? I have a lot of details. You won't want to take them in now. But under various headings. Firstly, re-equipment cost. No-till farming needs tractors half the size of the present tractors because you're not turning the soil over and throwing it up in the air, which is very hard work. But you do need special planters or no-till seed growers. Given that machinery has to be replaced all too often anyhow, re-equipment costs are probably manageable without any help from outside. The same applies to infrastructure for a livestock industry. Given the market demand, this should be self-financing. Biogas is something else. If you are in Moldova or Ukraine, in order to keep warm in winter, and it's a long, cold winter, you depend on Big Brother over the border, Russia, to supply natural gas. It will be a strategic investment to make your own. And the creation of a market for the biomass would do away with the need for any other incentives. If you give a farmer a market, he will produce the stuff. We all know about that. You remember the wine lake and the butter mountain? Well, Keith and I do. If we take a 500 kilowatt biogas plant as a standard unit, which it is, the installed cost of each of these things is about $2 million. For Moldova to replace its present coal and gas-fired generating capacity, we'll need 3,200 of these 500 kilowatt gas-fired generators. That's a cost of $6.4 billion. To make use of all the green material, which we would like them to grow in order to put the soil back into decent, you would need twice as many as that. So that's a cost of $12.7 billion at today's prices. These are the sums of money that green bonds have been invented for. The needed finance is there for the asking. Don't think small. It is futile. Think big. Think how big it could be, and then double it. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, David. That was, I think everyone will agree, indeed provocative. There's a lot to be done, but it can be done. And I hope we get some sensible questions coming out of that the panel can discuss. Many thanks indeed. I'm now going to ask Ed Turner to talk to us. He's a lecturer at Cambridge University Department of Zoology. He will discuss his work to improve biodiversity in oil palm plantations, mainly in Indonesia, under the title of Good Crop, Bad Crop, Oil Palm Cultivation and Management Options for More Sustainable Palm Oil. Ed, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm just going to share my screen. If I can do this. Great. Hopefully that's all coming through okay and you can all see that. Thank you, Keith, very much for that introduction. I think I've got about 20 minutes to talk to you. And what I want to try and do is really introduce you to projects we've been working with out in Indonesia, which look at ways you can manage agricultural systems more sustainably, and particularly focusing on oil palm systems. In a way, this follows on quite nicely from some of David's presentation earlier on. So again, we're thinking very much about how management of the whole system can benefit lots of aspects of biodiversity and lots of aspects of ecosystem function. The project I'm talking about, I should say, is a very collaborative one. So I've got a collaboration slide at the end, but when I'm talking about my work, it's actually lots of other people's work, really. We're quite a big team. So first of all, I think a lot of you will be familiar with oil palm anyway, but I'm going to introduce oil palm as a crop. I'm going to talk particularly about the program we've been working on, and I'm going to think about different ways that understory management, there's a particular type of management that we focus on, can be altered, benefit all aspects of lots of aspects of biodiversity. And that includes below ground processes as well. So we're managing very much from the ground up because we're managing the understory vegetation and all of the ecosystem associated with that within these established oil palm ecosystems. And I'm going to finish off by thinking about stuff on a slightly larger scale as well. So a bit, again, like David's talk before, thinking a bit bigger, but in our terms, bigger is thinking at the landscape scale rather than within the individual plantation. Oil palm is now, or palm oil, the produce of oil palm, is the most produced vegetable oil crop in the world. Its expansion has been absolutely dramatic over the last 30 or 40 years. And this nice schematic from The Guardian shows this. So what we've basically got here is the size of circles represents the amount of land area devoted to oil palm in different parts of the world. And if I zoom forward from the 1970s through to the 1990s, through to the 2000s, you can see how dramatically this has increased. And the real area it's increased up to date has been Malaysia and Indonesia, which together produce over 80% of the world's palm oil. So they're the centre of palm oil production. The crop itself comes from West Africa, and it's now beginning to expand there as well, and also in the New World tropics. So what we've seen in Southeast Asia is probably something that's going to be seen in other parts of the world as well. So lessons you can learn from plantations that are already established in Southeast Asia may be very important for forming more sustainable agricultural production in other parts of the world as well. The big headline news as far as biodiversity is concerned with oil palm is that biodiversity tends to mean a big drop in both the abundance and also in terms of the species richness of most major groups of animals and plants, and when compared to forest. That's not particularly surprising, particularly in Southeast Asia, where most of these studies will have been carried out. The rainforest is amongst the most diverse habitat in the whole world. So convert that from a plantation, from a forest which can have hundreds of species of trees per hectare to something which has just got one species, the oil palm, you of course get a big drop. And this is shown here with this arrow chart. So what we've got here are individual studies represented by individual arrows. And essentially, each arrow represents a study that's compared a forest area to an oil palm area. And we've plotted abundance on the x-axis and species richness on the y-axis. And what you can hopefully see is, if you unfocus your eyes, most of the arrows go from the top right to the bottom left. And that means they're moving kind of right to left on the x-axis and downwards on the y-axis, which means they're losing both abundance and biomass, comparing forest on the tail of the arrow to oil palm on the head of the arrow. So generally speaking, things do rather badly in oil palm. The flip side is that oil palm is incredibly productive per hectare. So compared to other vegetable oil crops, it's way more productive, perhaps 4 or 5 times more productive than the next most productive things. There's a flip side. The crop's neither good nor bad. It's rather a good crop in terms of production. It's just it happens to grow best in tropical regions, and that means very diverse areas. Part of the reasons why you lose all this diversity when you convert forest to oil palm is because of the loss of structural complexity. And these figures, the schematic is based on real data from Southeast Asian rainforests. And what we've got on the left is a rainforest area, undisturbed rainforest. And we've got on the right is an oil palm plantation. And what you can see is you lose enormous structural complexity when you convert a forest to oil palm plantation. These forests in Southeast Asia can be up to 90 meters tall, or taller actually. So they're incredibly diverse 3D structures, and that means loads of different habitats for lots of different species. Of course, when you convert to an oil palm plantation, you lose a lot of that. But again, when you think about it in terms of agriculture, oil palm's not that bad. It's a very long-lived crop. It can live for 25 years plus before it's replanted. So it can develop a lot of structural complexity in that time. So there's always this flip side in terms of how you think about oil palm in terms of the environment, I think. There's lots of potential there as well. The other side of things, which probably impacts species a lot, is just simply to do with microclimate. These two figures here show real data again from lots of data loggers that are put out across different habitat types in Southeast Asia, comparing the temperature on the left and the humidity on the right. And what we've got in red is an old growth forest. That's what OG stands for. So this is primary forest. In blue, LF is a log forest, so a forest that's been disturbed. It's had some trees removed. And then grey is the oil palm plantation. And hopefully, again, what you can see is the temperature. During the daytime, the temperature shoots up much, much higher in an oil palm plantation than it does in the forest habitat. And that's because you've lost all of this structural complexity. So everything's much more open. Therefore, the temperature goes up near the ground. And humidity, the reverse, of course, you haven't got this protection, you haven't got these trees here, so the humidity drops right down. Notice, of course, these changes in temperature are far higher than we might predict from global warming or anything like that, but they're happening overnight when you convert a forest into oil palm plantations. So these have real consequences in terms of what species can survive in habitats. You can already begin to see where I'm going for this. These are the reasons that species are being lost when you convert forest to oil palm. Of course, the question is, can you then use these lessons to manage agricultural systems, particularly perennial crops like oil palm, to try and reduce some of these impacts and therefore benefit biodiversity, and potentially with that aspects of the ecosystem functioning of oil palm plantations. And that's very much what our projects aim to do. You have to have an acronym to attract any funding these days, don't you? So mine's as is the BEFTA project, or BEFTA program now. So it's the Biodiversity and Ecosystem Function in Tropical Agriculture program. We did have an idea of having BEFTA awards for particularly good collaborators at one point. So what we've basically been trying to do is working very much within tropical agricultural systems. We're not thinking particularly about the forest traditionally, we've been thinking very much about established plantations. What can you do to try and increase biodiversity, to increase associated beneficial functions, potentially even benefit yield, but certainly not do anything to reduce yield. And that's our golden rule in this. We're working within an agricultural context. We don't want to reduce yield because to do so will mean you'll need to grow more of this crop. We're never going to replace the biodiversity of the forest. So it's always working within agricultural systems. What can we do? The project we've set up particularly takes a large-scale experimental approach. And the reason we've done that is because even though we're dealing with an agricultural system rather than a forest system, oil palm plantations are surprisingly complex. So there's loads of different species interactions going on there, thousands and hundreds of thousands of potential interactions. So what we're trying to do is simplify that by basically changing management in a set way to see if we can work out what the best management practice might be. Our project itself is based here in Riau province in Sumatra in Indonesia, and it's based very much on a collaboration. So we work with Smartry, which is Cinemas Agro Resources Technology Research Institute, which is the research arm of Golden Agri Resources, one of the largest oil palm producers in the world. If you were to put a pin in the part of the world which has the highest density of oil palm, I think it would probably land pretty close or even in our plots. We've gone for areas which are basically the highest, the real heartland of oil palm production. And the reason we've done that, apart from having access to a lot of data, which is really, really useful, it also means that anything we find out here is really at the bottom level in terms of environmental services and things like this. This is as converted and intensive as an agriculture landscape can get for oil palm plantation. So we've chosen that very deliberately. Our plot setup, you can see here, hopefully, is arranged in 6 different replicated blocks across a couple of different oil palm estates. And each one of those red blocks has got 3 different treatments in them. And we've set this up, as I say, in a fully experimental way, and I'm going to talk you through that now. So what we've got is a set of triplets in each of these 6 different areas, which each have 3 different managements. And we did it as a before-after controlled investigation, a so-called BACI design. So we kept everything as before treatment. We identified plots which are close together, and they're exactly the same in management. And we took a year of recording lots and lots of environmental information, biodiversity information from these plots, before we then imposed a treatment. And we imposed the treatment at random within each of these triplets, with 3 different treatments involved. And these were reduced, normal, and enhanced. In the reduced treatment, we applied much heavier levels of herbicide spraying than the plantations originally were. In the business as usual, the normal treatment, we kept up the management practices that were found in plantations where we were working at the time. And enhanced, we stopped any herbicide spraying at all and just encouraged manual cutting. The plots themselves are quite large, 150 metres by 150 metres, which is a significant investment in terms of a change in policy. Of course, we can only do that again by having our industry partners involved. So obviously they have to, they have to actually do this. And also, I suppose, assess that it would be possible for managers to do this, which it is. I should say, these treatments look really extreme, but these represent the range of understory management we see in the plantations just literally around our sites. So you can drive half an hour and see all of these plantations exactly the same as our plots, but actually carried out by real oil palm managers. So it's not an unrealistic setup. It just happens by luck that the plantations we are working in sit more or less in the middle. We started data collection back in 2012. As I say, we had a whole year's worth of data collection and then applied the treatments in 2014, early 2014. We've been monitoring the effects of those treatments since then. Actually, the project data collection has just come to a close. Next phase of the project. Once you set up experimental plots like this, it's amazing how many people are willing to collaborate with you. Because of course the hard work is often setting up these kind of treatments. So what we're able to do is actually bring in quite a lot of collaborators, and that includes lots of people from the industry. It also includes other people, student projects and things like that, working actually within these plots, as PhD students and stuff like that. So it can work quite well as an experimental setup, because of course you can just drop in and measure different groups. And so what we've got is data on a whole range of different groups, everything from predators right the way down to kind of decomposers, all sorts of things. I'm going to just cherry pick actually some of the different results today, because obviously I haven't got time to talk through it in detail, but this is just to give you a kind of an idea, a scope of it really. So we've aimed to try and cover a whole range of things across the ecosystem. We've used a lot of different traps to do that. Obviously I work on insects mostly, so a lot of the work's been done on insects. We've also got bird surveys, we've got surveys for frogs, we put out camera traps for small mammals in the plantation. Our industry partners have done a lot of work surveying for rats and things like that, which are important predators in these systems, loads and loads of stuff. And of course, we're also interested in what these animals are actually doing in the ecosystem. So we've also been measuring lots of important ecosystem functions, things like decomposition, things like seed removal, things like herbivory by photographing palms, and of course, things like yield. So working with industry, again, we're able to record yield. And because this is a perennial crop, we can literally follow the yield of individual trees year on year. And so it's a very tractable system for that in terms of changing management, experimental way, and actually seeing what the results are. So I'm going to cherry pick for you some results to give you a sort of flavour of what we've found. First of all, just to show you the treatments actually worked. So this is some nice data from Dedi Panamo and Sarah Luke here, who carried out all the vegetation surveys for us and analysed it. So essentially what you can see is cover per quadrat in the enhanced treatment, the normal treatment, and the reduced treatment, before and after treatment. And hopefully you can see the enhanced has gone up a bit. The normal's actually gone down a bit. That's probably because of a change in weather condition. We had an El Nino occurring at the same time. So another good reason why having experimental treatments helps you out. And then the reduced treatment, where the covers really dropped very dramatically. So the treatments worked. Interestingly, although we got that change in vegetation, we didn't get exactly the same pattern when it came to species richness. There are a reasonable number of species in these plots of understory plants. So we're only getting kind of like 4 or 5 species per quadrat. But overall, we were getting over 100 species of plants recorded. So they're surprisingly diverse. Again, these are mostly non-forest things. They're wider landscape species. They're still potentially quite important. In terms of the plant species, we didn't get a clear difference between the enhanced and normal. So although there's more coverage in the enhanced, it was the same species being found there. But where you use more herbicide, of course, you do lose a certain proportion of the species richness as well. Thinking about some of the impacts on the rest of the ecosystem, the wider biodiversity, and this is some nice work by Adventa on the bottom here and Adam just above, who was a master's student working on some of the data from the plots. And what they looked at was little soil pits. They dug soil pits and looked at soil invertebrates in our plots, this time just post-treatment. And they looked particularly close to the palms, which they call the weeded circle, and the windrow, which is the rest of the plantation, the rest of the non-close to palm bit of the plantation. And what they found was generally the species richness, in terms of ordinal richness of insects living in the soil, and the abundance of insects in the soil dropped in a stepwise way as you go from enhanced treatment to normal treatment to reduced treatment. So this is having impacts on things below ground, if you like. Slightly more complicated pattern when it came to the rest of the habitat in terms of the abundance. It wasn't quite so clear, but again, the reduced treatment having the lowest amount. So kind of impacts in terms of what's going on below ground. We've also got big impacts in some areas in terms of the most numerous group of arthropods. This is work from Millie Hood and again from Vento collected the data here for us, which is on antibundance. And so we've got ants on the top, abundance, and species richness on the bottom. In terms of Millie's data, she was collecting both before and after the treatments went in. So we've got before and post, and pre and post treatment, before and after treatment. And what she basically found was that in terms of the abundance, there was a clear increase in the abundance of ants in the normal treatment and enhanced treatment post treatment, but not in the reduced. Again, this is probably to do with the weather conditions, but interacting with the understory treatment. So essentially, again, reduced treatment seems to be suppressing the number of ants found per area. So remove the vegetation and you lose ants. And of course, these ants are incredibly important in terms of a whole range of ecosystem functions occurring within oil palm plantations. These are really important results. She followed this up with some lovely exclusion experiment work, which again, I haven't unfortunately got time to talk about today, but really, really clear effects. We also found the same thing. I'm going to move up through the ecosystem now. So I started on the soil because obviously the topic of the seminar is from the ground up. So I'm going to try and do the same. So soil has an impact. We get a reduced abundance in terms of soil invertebrates. We have a reduced abundance in terms of the ants living on the soil surface. We also have a reduced abundance in terms of spiders. There's a huge range of understory spiders living in this understory vegetation. And again, we found a very similar impact. So you can see the enhanced, standard, reduced abundance of understory spiders here, and also morpho species, number of species more or less on the bottom. And again, the reduced treatment dropping right down in terms of number of individuals. So another arthropod effect here. Moving up the ecosystem, I suppose here, we get the same kind of impacts when we're talking about predators now and thinking about things feeding on these other invertebrates. And particularly for frogs, there's a clear drop in abundance. I could have shown you the same plots for species richness. As soon as you lose this understory vegetation, the number of frogs go down. This has probably got quite important effects as far as pest control, because a lot of these frogs are quite arboreal. So they'll be up and feeding on the palms, particularly in the younger palms. It's potentially quite important for pest control. Lose the understory and you lose this potential pest control. And you even get these effects. We were very surprised about this in larger species as well. So this is nice data. This is Mohammed Naeem on the left here, who led this data as one of the smart tree scientists. And he put out lots of camera traps over all of our different plots and looked at the abundance of these beautiful predators, which are leopard cats, which are very common, native predators, very common in the oil palm plantation, very important for eating rats, which are a major pest. Essentially what he found again was when you compare change in abundance between years, between the enhanced, normal and reduced treatment, again, there's a higher incidence of leopard cats in enhanced treatments compared to the normal and reduced treatments. Now, the plots are too small for these to be a sort of stable population of leopard cats or anything like that. So we think this is probably leopard cats sort of facultatively moving in, perhaps doing more foraging here, and perhaps particularly spending time overnight here. Because of course, once you've got the denser vegetation, this is a really good place for them to spend the day, somewhere for them to hide. So probably a behavioural response here. Moving on to just a couple of examples of functions and how these can change. We've got very clear impacts in terms of decomposition. So again, decomposition rate is over 30 days, going down stepwise as you go from enhanced to normal and reduced. And we also have differences in herbivory as well, with herbivory levels being lowest in the enhanced plots than in the normal and reduced plots. And we're able to assess this using experimental baby palms that we put into the plots, so we can literally measure changes in rate over time. In terms of yield, you can see the graphs here are a complete mess, different colours for different treatments. Essentially nothing happens. So all of these benefits in terms of reducing herbicide can be seen without having a marked effect on yield, which makes it kind of quite a tractable approach. I'm running out of time. I think I've got a minute left. So what I wanted to finish off with in the last bit was just to think about some other projects. We're quite pleased with the results from the understory project. I've just given you a real whistle-stop tour of some of the benefits, but I think this really does reflect some of the stuff that David was talking about before, which is tweaks to managing the whole ecosystem can have surprising and wide-ranging impacts. And of course, what we're talking about here is just reducing cost in terms of putting in herbicides. So this is a very, very clear effect. What we've started to work on now, and to kind of give you a taster, perhaps if I was invited back to talk in a few years' time, is work we've been doing looking at larger scale changes, and that's particularly looking at effects of putting river margins back in, so putting forests back in at the landscape scale. And we started to do this with a series of plots, which we're calling this time the RERT project, Riparian Ecosystem Restoration and Tropical Agriculture. So again, another good acronym there, where we've basically put in different experimental treatments, replicated again at the landscape scale across rivers, to see how you can restore river margins within oil palm plantations, take out a little bit of crop area and see if you can get benefits in reducing erosion, all this sort of things, but also benefits in terms of biodiversity. The plots have only been in for a year, but because we're in the tropics, of course, the trees are growing incredibly fast. So this is Gung Ariwan, who's the project manager of the site, and you can see him in one of those trees. And amazingly, that tree is only about 18 months old. And so they go fast. So he planted that tree. It's amazing. So they went going as little seedlings. So we're very excited to see what impacts that has on the whole ecosystem. Obviously, because we're working very much with industry here, I think it has benefits in terms of us actually being able to disseminate the results, to actually produce change on the ground, because we're sort of embedded in that way. It works rather well. And we try and, as well as producing publications with scientific peer review publications, we've also done a lot of publications in the oil palm industry, publications as well, attending industry conferences and things like that, and also producing free identification guides to help plantations actually survey a lot of the species they wouldn't normally do within plantations. So particularly things like butterflies and dragonflies and things like that, which are quite easy to survey. So hopefully, I think just in time. I've not been getting the messages up. I think for some reason I can see I'm getting messages, but I didn't want to stop to check what they were, because I guess there'll be kind of 10 minutes, 5 minutes and 2 minutes. What I've tried to do is give you an introduction to oil palm a little bit about why potentially it has negative impacts on biodiversity, but also flagging up that it's a good crop in lots of ways, and something that we really need to understand more ecologically to try and minimize these costs. So learn why it loses biodiversity, and then think about how we can manage it to increase that biodiversity again. And hopefully what I've tried to show is through our experimental plots, there are actually lots of things you can do with rather simple management tweaks, which can have wide-ranging impacts on ecosystems, both below ground and above ground, leading right the way up into top predators. And just to thank the team, because it's a huge team of people actually doing all of the data collection and everything here. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Ed. Your screen is still up. Well, I shall carry on. I must say that was a fascinating talk, and the good crop, bad crop was a very, very sensible title, I think, and I think certainly they deserve a BAFTA award. And you talk about the RERTA projects, and you'd like an invitation back in a few years' time, and why not indeed? And meantime, you should join the TAA, I think. Thank you very much, Ed. That was fascinating. And our final talk today is Mariska, and she's actually speaking to us from Southern Africa. And Mariska is a consultant at Fauna and Flora International in Cambridge. She will talk on using domestic ruminants, livestock, cattle, goats, sheep, as a restorative force for soil health, livestock and regenerative agriculture practices using a holistic management approach. So over to you, Mariska.
Thank you very much, Keith. Let me share my screen. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Yes, as Keith has mentioned, I have 20 minutes to convince you that livestock is actually an incredible tool when it comes to conservation and restoration of soil. And we're going to look at how they can do it, how we can achieve this, and the regenerative agriculture practices using livestock. I will cover some perspectives. What are our problems we are facing? We'll talk a bit of soil, because for me that is the most important thing. What solutions are out there? How are we going to achieve this? What carbon sequestration options are there? And then I'll just briefly touch on veganism. So the current perspectives or the cow is the culprit. When we talk about greenhouse gas emissions, most people think of cows, and that is a pity. And I love this slogan that was created by Diana Rogers. It's not the cow, it's the how. And this really brings home that it is how us as humans manage cattle that is really really causing a positive or a negative effect. And today I will talk to you how holistic managed grazing can be a positive effect on the environment compared to traditional continuous grazing causing overgrazing, etc. Unfortunately, there were some studies done in the past 5 or 6 years that compared livestock emissions to transport emissions, and this was not comparing apples with apples. So they didn't look at the livestock cycle, the lifestyle cycle of transport when they compared us. And if we look at this diagram, we actually see that livestock only contributes 5% of direct emissions. It is vital that when we talk of livestock farming, and any farming in that, for that matter, is what is the way that we are farming. In the last century, industrial farming really took off, and it was destructive, and it is extractive. And what I want to talk to you about is regenerative farming. Regenerative agriculture, for me, sustainable agriculture is no longer a term because there is nothing to sustain anymore. We need to build, we need to restore, and we need to regenerate. And the current problems that we are facing is factory farming. This is an aerial view of a feedlot. And as you can see here on the left side of the picture, those are the enclosures. Those little dots are cattle, and they're kept there, and they're finished for your plate. And if this was the only meat left to purchase on the planet, then I will become a vegetarian. On the right, that is the runoff from the manure, the water wastage, the urine, etc. So this whole patch of land is dead. The soil is dead. It is so destructive to the environment, and there are vast areas that is covered by feedlots, and that is really what I want you to think about after this talk. Is there is a difference. There's a difference between beef production and regenerative beef production. If we talk about carbon, as you all know, everything that is alive contains carbon. And this was always in a beautiful balance. And there was this beautiful carbon balance, if we look back into ancient time, that sustained life. And then we found fossil fuels, and we extracted it, and we used it for energy, and we released this whole lot of carbon in the atmosphere. And David mentioned this. I mean, it might even be more now. This was about from 4 years ago, 880 gigatons of carbon in our atmosphere. There are 5 pools on this on the Earth or on the planet that sustains or that stores carbon. Is the atmosphere, the biosphere, the oceans, fossils, and then soil. And the way that we disrupted the cycle as humans was we started to deforest. We started with these agricultural practices that used tilling, that put on a whole lot of chemicals into the soil. And what all of this did, it released the carbon in the soil into our atmosphere. This formed this barrier in our atmosphere, and we are essentially trapping solar energy. And we all know the repercussions of this. It is climate change, and that has very, very negative effects on life on this earth as we know it. Then one of the other biggest threats to our ecosystem is desertification. And I will touch later on this, but this was caused a lot by domesticated livestock, wrongly managed grazing. And desertification is terrible, partly because grasslands are one of our biggest ecosystems on Earth. And also desertification forms bare ground. Bare ground heats up, it becomes hard, it becomes compacted. So water evaporates from it, water cannot infiltrate, it runs off, it causes erosion. It's got this whole bunch of negative effects. And what that does is we talk of effective rainfall, and your effective rainfall gets reduced. And effective rainfall is that amount of your rainfall that gets infiltrated into your soil and that sustains plant life. And this brings me to the passion that I have, is soil. And in the soil, we have plants. And plants have this amazing ability called photosynthesis. It takes CO2 and it gives us oxygen. And part of CO2 is carbon, and that carbon gets converted by the plants into carbohydrates, sugars, that gets transported by the roots into the soil. So what does plants do essentially then? It is taking carbon from the air and putting it into the soil. And it has been proven that soil is a wonderful, has a wonderful capacity to store carbon. And it can store it for many years, and it is actually good for the soil. It is not good for our planet to have all this excess carbon in the atmosphere, but it is good. The more carbon we have in the soil, the more nutrition available for the microbes. And we are finding out every day new species of microbes in our soil. There was a recent article, I just saw the headline today of a spoonful of soil in the Amazon. They found that the diversity of microbes in there is astonishing. This then forms topsoil. So we are building soil. Through these traditional agricultural systems, we have removed soil, as David also pointed out. We have just taken soil away and destroyed it. But through regenerative agriculture, we can actually build soil and therefore sequester more carbon. So we can look at these plants as carbon pumps. That's brilliant. And I like this illustration because 90% of soil function is mediated by microbes. These microbes cannot survive if there are no plants in the soil. And so how we manage the plants is critical. And that brings me to livestock. Ruminants, and that is cattle, sheep, goats, they are essential to plant management, to enhancing our plants, to improving our plants. And if they are managed correctly by us humans, they are this wonderful tool that we can achieve this. And David has covered all of this earlier, but I'll just quickly run through it again. So how do we improve the soil? Through cover crops, through plant diversity. Your cover crops, your cash crops, all mixed, broadleaf, grass type plants. Diversity above ground is diversity below ground. And the more diverse microbes you have in your soil, the healthier soil is. Avoid or minimize the use of synthetic fertilizer, fungicide, insecticide, herbicides. I love how Dr. Christine Jones put it. It's a no-brainer that something designed to kill things is going to do just that. Why are we putting something onto our soil that is going to kill this beautiful abundance below ground? Increase your perennials, and this is where livestock again is beautiful. If you manage them correctly, you can actually graze to enhance those plant species that you want. Plant trees, certain environments, that is brilliant. And this brings me back to holistic plant grazing. No tilling. I mean, David has covered this. This is not part of my talk, but I mean, it's simple things. This improves the water infiltration into our soil. It can store the water better, it's aerated better. I mean, all these things form beautiful, healthy soil. And that is when we start to capture carbon from the atmosphere and put it back where it belongs. And this is, every farmer out there is a carbon farmer. Just, are you aware of it? And are you doing a good job of it? I mean, you might think you're farming with maize or soy or cattle or sheep, but you are essentially farming with carbon. And if you are doing a good job of it, I mean, you are creating an environment for generations to come. And so, how can cattle achieve this? We have to look at the ancient life cycles, land cycles on this earth, healthy landscapes. I mean, if we look back at the prairies that was formed in America, there were millions of bison roaming those rangelands, and they were moving in these tight, bundled herds, because for security there were predators behind them, there were wolves. The same thing for the wildebeest in East Africa, and constantly moving because they are trampling the ground, they are urinating, they're manuring, they are essentially fertilizing the ground, so they have to keep moving because they cannot graze there where they've done this, and these predators are behind them, so they're constantly moving, so they are only coming back to that patch of land in a couple of months when it has had time to restore itself, when those plants have had time to restore their roots, restore themselves. And when we started to domesticate livestock, hundreds of thousand years, whenever, tens of thousand years, it is overgrazing happened and overresting happened. And overresting is as important as overgrazing. Moribund grasses are terrible. And this is where I want to reiterate, because I know the bad name that cattle has in conservational circles is overgrazing is not a matter of too many animals. It is a matter of time. So overgrazing happens when a cow eats a plant and she comes back to that plant before it has had time to restore itself. So if you as a human managing your livestock correctly and you are bundling them tight, giving that ground good workout for a short period of time, and then give it adequate rest, optimum time rest, you are improving those plants. You are improving the soil that those plants are living in. You are increasing diversity. You are grazing non-selectively. Cattle love to graze selectively. They will only go for the good plants. So what happens? Those good plants die and the bad ones take over. I can go on. So how do we do this? Why do we use cattle? Because cattle we can manage. We cannot tell our buffaloes, please go and graze there, or any African will tell you, you're not going to chase buffaloes on. So we can use these livestock as a tool to mimic nature, and we can do what I just described. Use portable fences, use herders wherever you are, whatever. There is numerous evidence out there that is proving that this is working. I beg you, after I have spoken, please go and look at these, find these images. And it works. It works in so arid environments: Mexico, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Kenya, wherever. The steppes. I mean, it is. There has been beautiful evidence there of how livestock improves rangelands, and then essentially the soil. But you have to plan your grazing, and you have to plan it holistically, and therefore you take in account your whole ecosystem. You cannot just focus on one thing. You must understand you are managing an ecosystem. I mean, we have amazing people out there doing this, and I giving you two examples here. The one is white oak pastures in America. Through this diagram, you can see that they are actually they are producing grass-fed beef. They have a negative net total emission. This pound of carbon dioxide per pound of meat produced. I mean, this is incredible. They are carbon farmers, and they are making a sustainable living from producing good, healthy beef. Not only healthy for you, but healthy for the environment. The same thing with force of nature meats. If we look here at conventional beef production, what their emissions are per pound of beef, and then these two meat alternatives, they've got these positive emissions, whereas force of nature, you know, producing their beef in a planned, holistic manner, have negative carbon emissions. This is amazing. So yeah, I mean, and therefore I want to ask you, go and search for these people. They said far better than I, and they are doing it. They are showing you the results. They are proving it every day. We cannot ignore this anymore. We have to farm regenerative, and we cannot remove livestock from the cycle. Yeah, I mean, I just want to ask the vegans out there, if there are any on this webinar, please just go and look at the emissions of your product and see. I mean, I know there's many reasons for becoming a vegan, but this is a very complex topic and you cannot just simply remove meat from the equation. Thank you very much. Yes, I will wait for questions.
Can you hear me? I think I'm unmuted.
Yes.
Excellent. No, very interesting, and a good overlap with David, and indeed with Ed as well. Especially, I was interested in the emphasis these days on microflora, microfauna in soils. When I studied soils, that wasn't really thought of at all. But it did matter. Thank you for that. I'd just like to remind people that we have, I think, about 95 participants in the webinar. We shall be going on now to have a panel discussion, and we will then be recording the whole thing as it goes along, and Michelle will explain at the end how you can access that. And we also plan to put summaries of each paper up on the TAA journal Ag for Dev. Right, so thank you again, Manishka. I will now come on to ask Emma, who is going to read out the questions that have been selected by our participants. And I will then try to assess which panel member might be the best person to start and kick off on the question. So over to you, Emma.
Great, thanks, Keith. Can I just say a reminder, there's quite a few questions. If you have any, please submit them now and vote for your favourite questions, because I don't think we'll be able to get through all of them, but I'm going to prioritise those that have the most likes. So the first question is from Paz Duran. It's actually directed at Ed. So regarding the small differences in species richness between enhanced and normal, could this suggest that the enhanced treatment still doesn't provide a suitable habitat to species that would normally occur in the forest? Otherwise, should we see a larger increase? How would you interpret this small difference?
Okay, Ed, I think it's been targeted at you.
Am I unmuted now? Sorry, I didn't want to unmute me for some reason. My computer didn't want me to answer. Can you hear me now? Okay. So I think it's a very good question. And I think I was just panning through the other questions as well. It relates a little bit to other questions as well, which are thinking about forest species in oil palm landscapes. My kind of main caveat, I think, to the work we're doing is that we would never say that oil palm is as good as forest for maintaining biodiversity. It's very, very, very clear that it isn't. And I think we're probably getting to the stage where even the most vocal of oil palm advocates, and there are very vocal industry advocates historically, would probably struggle to say that now because the evidence is completely overwhelming. So what we're thinking about is very much how you can make more biodiverse and more functioning and more stable, actually, something I didn't really mention in my talk, agricultural ecosystems in established oil palm plantations. And I think there's a lot you can do there. As it happens, there are forest species or so-called forest species that you can get in well-managed oil palm plantations, and that's where you get the shadier plantations, you get the more stable environments, and you get the more diverse understory. So we do get things which are sort of listed in the books as being forest specialist species moving in. But I think generally, I'd very much advocate separating. So I haven't done this in my talk actually because I was placing it in context, which often people do. I'd separate the impacts of agricultural oil palm expansion into forests from how you manage established oil palm systems. I think there are different questions. So I think that in terms of saving global biodiversity, preserving as many species on the planet, the jury's out. Basically, it's very clear that we need to preserve as much forest as possible. That's very, very clear. But we've got lots of very productive oil palm systems. So what can we do to benefit that? And I think these kind of tweaks, although relatively small, it's not that small actually. It can be surprisingly big depending on the group you're looking at, and will have an impact over a very, very large area. I think in terms of whether it's whether differences between the enhanced, the normal, and the reduced, in fact, it varies a lot between different groups. So we found generally the pattern that enhanced was highest, normal was next, and then reduced was the lowest. And that was pretty much the pattern all the way across. But where the drop was varied a lot from different groups. And I think that's very interesting. I think that's what your question's getting at. And I think it basically depends on how exposed the system is. Generally speaking, for things living in the understory and stuff, we tended to see the drop actually happen between enhanced and normal. And for things in the wider landscape, we tended to see it was between normal and the reduced. So I think it probably depends on the species ecology. Does that answer the question more or less? I talked around it a bit.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you very much. I think you did very well there. I think we have another one for David coming up. Is that right, Emma?
Yeah, so the next question is for David. So regarding the subtleties of organic farming versus conservation agriculture, how do the benefits of organic vegetable farms, which incorporate healthy hedgerows and a diversity of crops, but maintain tillage practices prior to planting, how do these benefits compare to regenerative agriculture, particularly in the context of Irish or UK agriculture, where organic farms are already under the strain of having few subsidies compared to beef farmers?
David, can you chip in there then?
Well, I will struggle. Organic farms have a problem with organic matter because they nearly always till quite intensively. They actually get rid, by cultivation, smashing up the structure, organic matter faster than your conventional farm because of the intensive tillage. And usually they're importing organic matter from outside in order to maintain. They also have to import organic matter to import nutrients. So by and large, organic farms operate in many cases by bringing in stuff from a wide range, other materials from a wide range of places outside them. I think that's a major problem they have. One example that I do know of that manages more or less their own supplies of organic matter is by chipping their hedgerows and little woodlots on there as well, and spreading wood chips over the area in order to augment the organic matter that they need to keep things going. But beyond that, I'm sorry, I've lost the main drift of the question now. Can you, sorry, give me the beginning of the question again, carry on.
Yeah, so it's regarding the subtleties of organic farming versus conservation agriculture. How do the benefits of organic vegetable farms compare to regenerative agriculture?
Yes. I don't think they have any benefits. Unless it's possibly taste, and that's a subjective thing. I would generally go for the regenerative area myself. It's very hard work being an organic farm. You've got to do an awful lot of things, and it's very hard to make a living, as they say. So I think as far as the soil's concerned, the regenerative wins hands down, and it's an awful lot easier to do and probably makes more profit. That I have to lose. I'm really rather ignorant on organic farming. Sorry.
I think what a lot of organic farmers would say is that they're not putting on toxic chemicals. That's the sort of thing I would look at.
Well, with regenerative, if you have a decent crop rotation, you don't have to, you're using less toxic chemicals than your conventional farmers, and probably no more than your organic people. I think, providing you've got a deep, providing you're not really spraying the soil with all these nasty things which every speaker's mentioned, but are using biological controls, they're all winning that way. And regenerative farmers generally use much less chemical than conventional. I think they're probably on a par with organic for the amount of nasties that they spray in one way or another.
I think, should we perhaps move on to another question now, because time is running out. Emma, can you provide us with, I see there's quite a lot coming up.
Yeah, so the next question is for Mariska. In India, they're looking for approaches to measure the level of carbon released to the atmosphere through agricultural practices so they can assess the environmental impacts that are being generated. Would you say this is the best way, or the most effective way to measure this?
Yeah, so I was reading that. I was trying to find, I've got a link on my computer to an India specific project. I couldn't find it now, and I was trying also to listen to the other questions, but I can just post it later if I find it. I'm not too familiar with India, but regarding measuring carbon, there's this program called Cool Farm Tool. If you just Google that, you'll get to it. And it is a free application to farmers, and you can just input all your agricultural activities and so forth, and it can generate a carbon emission figure for you. And then there's more, more rudimentary ways. I'm not an expert on that. But if you, I will ask this lady to go and search for Alan Williams. He's got some great YouTube videos on how he's measuring carbon on his farm, I think with a spade and a piece of plastic bag. It's just got to do with a better water infiltration and all of that. So even though you don't have the specific scientific figure, you can see, is your soil improving? So yeah, I will, it's Alan Williams and Cool Farm Tool. Thanks, Keith.
Okay. And Emma, do we have somebody else with a question?
Yeah, so there's one from Ed that follows on a little bit from the previous question, around with the kind of understory restoration appearing modest, with, you know, it's not really a real compensation for the forest lost. Of course, it's good to try and make the most out of the opportunities available, but is there a danger the oil palm industry will use this as greenwashing?
Ed.
I'm forgetting to unmute myself. So I think there is always a danger with greenwashing. There's also a danger with blackwashing from the conservation side of things. From my point of view, I think that researchers have got quite we've got an important role in sitting in the middle. In my experience, NGOs will work quite happily with researchers, as will oil palm companies. But you have to be unbiased in what you find. Strangely, working, and I should also say that all the work we do is covered by a MOU, which basically means we have complete right of freedom over all of the data we collect. We can publish anything without any danger of not, you know, actually we've never experienced that, but that's in place just so that we can be completely open about anything that we find. Strangely, from my experience working with the oil palm industry, and again, we're working with large plantations here, there's been very little worry about what we'll find. And I think the reason is that the oil palm industry has already gone through such an intensive battle with NGOs, which we're all very well aware of. I think it's so kind of common in the literature and in the papers. So strangely, they're not really worried that anything we can find will be worse than their image at the moment. And that's made them remarkably open to trying to identify new ways that they can improve the management. So I think there is always a danger of greenwashing. We certainly need to be aware of that. But I've not experienced any fear of that myself. In fact, people have basically just been interested in taking up any particular options, especially because we're always working within the remit that we're trying to either keep yield the same or even increase it through these management techniques, and that's absolutely key. And the key reason we're doing that is because we know that oil palm can't replace forest. So you want to be doing stuff which basically comes with a benefit for agriculture as far as possible, whether that be an immediate benefit in terms of yield, whether it be a longer term benefit in terms of increased sustainability perhaps, or reduced variation in yield. And I think that's probably the main thing we'll get. Again, I would say that the difference is, although they're modest compared to cutting down a forest to an oil palm plantation, they're actually huge in terms of agricultural modifications. And of course, they come with benefits. Even though they don't change yields, they do mean a massive cost saving in terms of herbicide applications. And they mean quite a big saving probably in terms of the environment and runoff from herbicides, although we're not specifically looking at that because we've typically chosen very flat plots. So I think there's that side of things. Yeah. Does that answer the question? I hope that does.
Thank you, Ed. That's fine. Can I, Emma, just note that there's a question here from Lalita, who is asking about the use of no fallow in the Indian farming context. And I think when David might want to answer this, but in David's context in the Black Earths, the fallow means a complete year in which there were no crops grown, because the winter is very cold. You have one season. In India, you've got the Kharif crop, you've got the Rabi crop. It's a very different system. So with CA, you don't have to have the fallow anyway. Does that make sense? Can you see the question from Lalita? I hear Manikam, David.
I don't see. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Right.
It's just that
principally two things. One is that if you're fallow, you're losing money or you're not making anything. So every week that you're not growing something, you're losing the opportunity to grow something, and that means you're losing profit. If you grow something, however little, you're either putting stuff back into the soil to benefit the next crop, or you're growing something that you can sell. So to leave ground bare at any time is a no-brainer.
Yeah, and under the Indian context, you can get 2 crops a year anywhere.
Or 3.
Or 3, indeed. Yes.
Indeed, yes.
3 monsoon. Yeah.
Okay. The general idea is just if your ground is bare, it gets eroded. and it gets hot and it gets dry and you kill all the worms and all the microarthropes and all that sort of thing. So it's simply generally bad. If you keep it covered with anything, then has to be better.
Thank you. Thank you. Emma, have we got any more? I see we're beyond our scheduled time, but I think we can go on for another question at least.
I think we've got one more that's got a couple of votes if we just address that one. So where soils are highly degraded with, low phosphate, micronutrient deficiencies, high acidity, in that kind of situation, some use of inorganic fertilizer is probably essential. What are the views about an integrated soil fertility management program compared to going fully organic?
Well, who's going to take that one, Mariska or David? I mean, there's. In fact, this is Kim Ellis-Jones. Yes.
If I may, low phosphate. So what we normally do in such situations is we would put out a type of hay, onto that patch of land, and we use livestock to eat that hay and essentially re-fertilize the land. And we have got some good results with that. The next year there's abundance of grass species coming up there and some diversity again. So yeah, I mean, some use of inorganic fertilizer is probably essential, not necessary. For me, it is always important to think maximum profit per hectare. If you have livestock, but you also must think of the environment, but you must also make a living. So why do you want to go and buy now fertilizer if you don't have to? You use your cattle as these beautiful fertilizers. So yeah, I would do that approach.
David, a further point was that 10 or 15 years ago, it would probably pay to put some ground phosphate and, in fact, almost any artificial fertilizer on as well. But the prices have moved against that now. So that the less you use of the expensive stuff, probably the better. But if you're really low in things, then almost anything you put on will be good, but you've got to keep the ground covered.
Yeah, and that you can achieve with the cattle.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Sure.
Yes.
Throw anything on the surface and get your animals to eat it. They do tremendous stuff. And then the microorganisms
animals, but
sit away as well and do their stuff.
Thank you, David and Mariska. I think, is that, Emma, have we come to the end of the voted questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you once again for everybody coming and listening. I don't know how many are still with us, but I hope people have stayed on to the end. Thanks for the speakers as well for giving some, I thought, some very interesting talks, which I didn't fall asleep in. We're grateful again to Michelle for handling the webinar technology. And for those of you that were not here right at the beginning, perhaps we'll put the holding slide up again. Okay, just to,
Oops.
the holding slide. We're getting that one, no? Yes. Just to recap on what the talks were all about. And the fact that the proceedings will be available. If you wanted to ask any questions or get hold of the printouts eventually, that's where they are. So I think that's all I have to say now, but we much appreciate the effort from everybody. I think it was extremely worthwhile, and we look forward to the 8th annual webinar or seminar next year. Thank you, everybody. I'll just ask Michelle to say a final word on behalf of FFI and the technology.
Sure. Yes, I'm going to say a final word on behalf of the technology. Zoom says thank you to everyone for joining us. Big thanks to the panelists. You guys did a great job. Big thanks to the hosts and Emma and Mariana and Francesca and Howard, who couldn't be here, who helped us put this together on the back end. And just to let you guys all know that this has been recorded and you'll receive a link tomorrow in your email, the same format that you've been receiving all these registration and reminder links, where you can find that video if you want to see it or share it with your friends. So I think that's it. Thank you, everyone.